friendly neighborhood PhD, and you're listening to the Tye Pod.
Okay, well, hey everybody, it's another episode of the Tye Pod, and I'm excited to have Annie Tulkin join me today. She is the CEO and founder of Accessible College, right?
Yep, that's
Yep.
right.
And so, yeah, I'm really excited to get into that area, being, someone who was in academia at university for quite a while with disability. I'm really looking forward to, getting your thoughts on what you kind of offer for people, that are transitioning into that area.
Yeah, I'm excited to tell everybody about it.
Awesome. Well, first, I have to start off with an icebreaker that sometimes is actually the hardest question. But is there a song that resonates with kind of you and your story, or one that you just are really liking right now? However you want to take that, basically.
There's a lot to unpack in how I'm feeling these days, but I think that one thing that just immediately came to mind, which is going to be maybe a throwback, maybe it'll be new for some listeners, is We're Not Gonna Take It by Twisted Sister.
Yes, I love that.
You can give it a listen. We are not getting like kickbacks from Twisted Sister for plugging this
That
song.
would be nice, by the
I
way.
know we would take it, Ty and I would.
Hmm.
But like when you dissect as a kid, there was like an audio recording of me singing this song when I was like 4 years old because I had older siblings who were like 10, 12 years older than me.
Hmm.
And now as an adult, when I started like re-listening to the song and really listening to the lyrics about sort of like unpacking all these pieces around like not accepting things as they are, there are a
Hmm.
lot of sort of parallels with my work and with the work that I do with students. And so I was like, yeah, that's the song that I'm feeling today.
Perfect. That is awesome. And I don't know about you, but like as I've sort of gotten older and learned how to like advocate a little more for myself and push things, like the lyrics talk to me a lot more now than they used to even 5, 10 years ago. So it's
Yeah,
it's
I
really
was,
interesting.
and it was like on my mind because I was at a summit for Becker Muscular Dystrophy this past weekend, and I was hearing a lot of really empowering conversations from adults who are living with Becker and talking. They were talking to youth and families too, and I was like, that song just kept coming up into my head.
I
So,
love that when you
so
get one
lots of
that kind of,
parallels.
yeah, when it connects that well and just stays there,
Hmm.
you're kind of in a nice space when that's happening.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, perfect choice. Well, that's awesome. But transitioning into kind of you and your story, like I thought if you wanted to give just kind of an overview of, your life, like how you've gotten to this point, and then we can go
Yeah.
more into, the accessible college type of topics.
Yeah, so let me just start by saying what Accessible College is. So I am the CEO of Accessible College. I provide college transition support for students with physical disabilities, which is a big tent term. So it might be wheelchair users, mobility device users, students who are ambulatory and sometimes use a wheelchair or mobility device, students with sensory impairments, and then also students with chronic health conditions, which is another big tent term. So that's like
Hmm.
students with POTS or Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, autoimmune disorders, Crohn's disease, diabetes, sort of you name it.
The spectrum, right?
You
Hmm.
name it. And I support those students. So I work with students on thinking about their needs holistically as they're starting to engage in the college search and maybe starting to think about what they want to get out of college. So we think about accommodations, the whole spectrum, housing, dining, academics, transportation. I also work with students on thinking about independent living and continuity of care. And that sort of work is not always something that they're getting from their high school counselor at school
True.
or from an outside counselor, college counselor. So I got into this work because I used to be the associate director of the Disability Support Office at Georgetown University.
Hmm.
So I was there for about 6 years working with undergraduate, graduate, and medical school students with physical disabilities and chronic health conditions. And I was really surprised that there were so many students coming into school who didn't really know what sorts of accommodations they could request. They hadn't really thought about how it was all going to work out with independent living. And so that's why I started Accessible College. But the actual story starts even further back than
Yeah,
that, right?
yeah.
So it's like, um, as a kid, was diagnosed with a learning disability. Both of my parents were guidance counselors. They
Hmm.
recognized that school was not going super easy for me. And so they had the wherewithal to get a neuropsych evaluation for me. And I was diagnosed with a learning disability as a kid. As an adult, I've also sort of acquired some chronic health conditions, some of which impact my mobility. And
Mhm.
so I also now have sort of that lens as I'm talking to students and working with students too. And I would say for me, having more invisible disabilities, this has been something that I've sort of struggled with and
Mhm.
in talking about. But now, as an adult, it's become a lot easier for me to talk about it, and to actually be more out about it too, and to help students understand, how they can be good self-advocates and how they can get the support that they need, especially as they're emerging into adulthood and in the college setting. And so that's sort of perspective I bring, and it's a passion that I bring as well, because I think it's super important, and I don't think we have enough conversations about it. Um, so yeah, so I have a partnership with the Christopher and Dana Reeve Foundation. So students with any type of paralysis can work with me for free through them. I've also worked with the Muscular Dystrophy Association on a ton of resources, and the Perkins School for the Blind on resources for college readiness. Um, and yeah, my personal journey has really informed this business that I have now. And part of that personal journey was going to college to become a teacher. I thought, I'm going to be a high school teacher.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. And then, and then I thought, oh, I don't want to go right into teaching. So I joined the Peace Corps. I was a Peace Corps volunteer in Mongolia for 2 years, where I
Wow.
worked in far eastern Mongolia, teaching Mongolian English teachers, teaching pedagogy and things like that.
Mhm.
But it was there where I saw a lot of students with disabilities. And so I started to think about, how are students with disabilities included in education? So I went to get my master's degree in special ed, and I thought I would have an international lens. So I got a Fulbright, and I went back to Mongolia, and I studied Mongolian teachers' perceptions of disability in the classroom. Um, and I then had to get a real job. And
Eventually
so
we have to, right?
and then so I started working for an association, the Association of University Centers on Disability,
Mhm.
which is a national network of UCED's University Centers in Excellence in Developmental Disabilities across the United States. And it was there that I started getting more sort of content knowledge and awareness about policy issues and advocacy issues related to people with disabilities.
Mhm.
And so I brought that work into my work at Georgetown and into my work in the ADA compliance space later on, and now into this position. So that was the migratory journey that I did with
Wow.
Tye to
Well,
get where I am today.
I love that because, I mean, you had kind of the personal tie to it right away growing up with disability, but then I feel like phases of your life, you picked up more and more things to kind of mix into that are also important in planning and living with disability and going to college. I mean, that there's so much complexity there that's involved. And just looking at my own case, like I was from a small rural high school and I didn't even know really what major I wanted. And, and I was commuting. And then it was like, well, how do I find, are there resources? What's offered? What can I do while trying to maintain, keep the grades where they needed to be? And so there's so much there.
Yeah.
But I'm
And
curious for
yeah.
you, like, was there a light bulb moment when you felt comfortable sort of sharing
Mm.
more of your disability, like personal story, or what was that kind of like for you?
Yeah, I think like when I started working in the college setting as an administrator, right? So I had, when I was in that position, it was our disability support office back then at Georgetown was very small. It was me and the
Mhm.
director and over 1,000 students registered with disabilities, which is not uncommon.
Yeah.
So um, I got the privilege of working one-on-one with students, and I think a lot of times when we were having conversations about, especially hidden disabilities or invisible disabilities, some of these things would emerge when I was talking to students, right? And I started to talk more about self-advocacy skills and the personal side of how you can be a good self-advocate and what that looks like. And I think when you share that experience with people who are experiencing some of these things, it resonates a little bit more because they know
Mhm.
that you understand what they're talking
Mhm.
about. Um, and like as an employee, I started to experience more physical symptoms of some of the conditions that I had. So I actually had to request reasonable accommodations in
Okay.
that office setting process. Um, and so I had that experience.
Mhm.
And now like I work for myself. So I make accommodations for myself all day, every day, right?
Right.
Um,
Right.
for me, it's like I'm generally standing up most of the time. I have like multiple standing desk setups. I have to be able to move around more. Um, So like there are things that I make that create, create more accessibility for me and allow me to do my job. But I think like it's a journey, right? And everybody's at a different place in their journey. And
True.
because I work with young adults all the time, I see a lot of people on different points of their journey.
Hmm. Right, right.
And especially for students, like you were describing yourself, like who are coming from communities where you might be the only student in your high school who uses a
Right,
wheelchair or
exactly.
mobility device. And like that is a different experience. And also, like, I just think it's really important for students to know that there are other people who have navigated this path before you, right? And
Hmm.
like that it can be done because I do feel like it can be very isolating, whether you have a visible condition or an invisible condition. We're just not talking enough about it, which is why I'm so stoked to be on this podcast having this
Hmm.
conversation with you.
No, that makes perfect sense, and like if I wish I could have told or like provided some resources to myself at that age because, there wasn't anyone really that I could relate to or see that had done that before, and going through kind of the PhD process, it was even more obvious that this is a space that there's not many people in it. And I always wonder, is that just lack of awareness? Is it because they don't have, you know, like one of the accommodations they need? Obviously, like it's that hierarchy of needs, that people have. And how can you consider college or doing a career when, oftentimes you're trying to figure out like day-to-day care and, things like eating, drinking, depending on your disability and the severity of it. It can it can add a lot of weight. And so I wonder if programs like yours, which there are not many that I have. I mean, you're the first one I think I've ever seen that has your
I'm
own.
it. I'm the
uh,
only one.
Yeah, like so if that, I just feel like if one more door were open
Yeah.
from working with you, like that would be really valuable for kids going into that space.
Yeah. I mean, there are a few things you said that I was like, oh, I'm putting pins
Uh,
in this mentally as you're
yeah.
talking. But first, I think like it's really important for people to understand like sort of the data pieces of this, like higher education. So like we know 21% of college students report having a disability.
Mhm.
So that's a lot of people. That makes students with disabilities the largest marginalized group on any given college campus. It also
Mhm.
means that like on any campus, there's like 10 to 20% of students who are actually receiving accommodations. But then there's this whole other group of students who probably could get accommodations for their conditions, but
Exactly.
aren't for a variety of reasons. Stigma, they don't have the documentation, they don't think they're going to need it, whatever those issues are. But students with physical disabilities are like the smallest part of the whole population of
Mhm.
students with disabilities on a college campus. So that often means that like the disability support office or accessibility office is more used to dealing with students with learning disabilities and mental health conditions and maybe doesn't have a ton of experience with students with physical disabilities or sensory conditions. So which might be something that you experienced.
To be honest with you, I don't remember even going to the Accessibility Resource Center that was at my university
Mm,
until I want to say grad school halfway through, or maybe even later, and part of it was like that. I think that almost stubbornness I had, like I'm just going to do it myself, and obviously with my care situation, I was able to succeed, without accommodations. But if I would have known beforehand that there was even anything like that, like maybe that's something I could have pursued, and I think about um, some classrooms with the desks that I had to actually physically push my chair into the desk to get it turned the right way to write notes, and things like that. I'm like, well, that
hmm
could have been something that I could have went to the resource center and gotten changed, so all those kind of things
Yeah.
are so important, I think.
And just so for anybody who's listening, a reasonable accommodation for accessible classroom furniture is totally something you can request if you have a physical disability.
Mhm.
So that, that is a consideration. I often talk to students about like, mitigating challenges, right?
Mhm.
Like if we can make things just like a little bit easier for you to access to reduce that barrier to, to whatever it is that you need, like that's going to be huge. But students have to know what they need and they have to be able to request it. And that's where those self-advocacy skills become huge. You mentioned like the graduate setting, sort of like post undergrad, right? So going into a master's program, a PhD program, or any type of program like that. We actually see like a drop off statistically of people requesting accommodations. And I think like it's not that they don't need them anymore. It's just that the stakes get a little bit higher. And I think
True.
that and I think that people get a little bit, fearful about repercussions in smaller communities and settings, so they don't ask for accommodations, but
That's
they
a good
absolutely
point.
can. They
Yeah.
can.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of communities of academics with disabilities, right? So like people who work in academia and have all types of disabilities. They are a coordinated group of people, and
Mhm.
they have communities too. And same with like people who are doctors. There's a great organization called Docs with Disabilities that supports people in any sort of medical education programming, and
Mhm.
nurses now are jumping on board, and there's others too that are sort of coordinating, because this is, people with disabilities are, 1 in 4 people in the US, adults
Right.
in the US. So it's like there's a lot of us.
It's a significant, yeah,
We just need
significant
to get
part.
organized.
Right, right. And that's the thing also I think about a lot is like because disability is such a diverse spectrum of, you know, experiences and needs and all of that, it's hard to consolidate, or it's hard to kind of bring those groups together to, push for more accessibility. It seems like even on social media, there's like one account for only this diagnosis,
Yeah.
and it's so scattered, and then the college experience is scattered. Like certain universities obviously offer more than others. So like that's all those things to navigate is a lot of weight, a
Yeah.
lot of pressure on top of, whatever else you're going through. So, like I'm curious, like as you were starting this out, what was the response like? And maybe you have a few examples of maybe some parents and kids that you visited with on, how to make things work.
Yeah, so I started Accessible College sort of as a side hustle back
Mhm.
in 2014, which is
Mhm.
like ages ago. And then I've been doing it 6 years full time now. So this is my full-time job, and I work with people across the country. So I see and I hear a lot. Um, and I would say like the sort of number one thing that people are sort of thinking about, might be around like the accommodations for college, like what
Mhm.
they might need. I would say that a lot of people aren't really aware of like what might be available to them. And that a lot of families haven't really thought about like holistically what the needs might be, like the
Mhm.
living needs, the sort of independent living needs. So one great example of this, Ty, and this might also resonate with you, is that like if you have a one-on-one aide in high school, or a support person in high school who's helping you sort of navigate maybe from class to class, or doing some of those activities of daily living that you were mentioning, like eating or toileting or things like that, or sometimes aides will like support students in the classroom too. Colleges don't provide one-on-one aides. So if a student needs a personal care attendant in the college setting, they have to hire, fund, and manage their own PCAs. And I spend a lot of time with families, like talking about that and thinking through those pieces, because when a student's in high school, it's like they go to high school and they're there from 8:30 to 3 every day.
Mhm.
And then generally a parent or a guardian might be supporting some of these pieces at home, right? Like around all the activities of daily living that the student might need. So for a lot of students, it's the first time that they're actually thinking about, what life is going to look like without a guardian taking care of them or assisting them, right? And they may have had the same support person in their K through 12 setting, like
Yeah.
from first grade or kindergarten, who's been with them their whole life, and they have to start thinking about, okay, I'm going to have a new person, or how am I going to get what I need in the classroom? Like, how do I
Mhm.
talk to the disability support office about what those needs are to make sure that I can, access the things I need to access? So I work with families to sort of talk through those pieces. And that is a huge shift
Mhm.
from the K through 12 setting, where students will get services and supports, to the college setting, which is governed under the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act, which is just
Mhm.
about reasonable accommodations. So
Right.
that's very different from K through 12.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. And so like do you with whenever you're meeting with them, do you actually try to pinpoint like this is where you can get, personal care attendants and how to reach out, and like
Yeah.
is that okay?
So a lot of the work that I do is helping students first identify what accommodations they might need in the college setting. So, from the academic setting, so it could be things like priority registration, or accessible classroom furniture, or extra time on assessments, or the ability to use like speech to text, like all of those sorts of things. And it could be housing accommodations too, because a lot of the students that I work with do choose to live on campus. So
Mhm.
they might need, an accessible room with an ensuite bathroom with, an accessible shower and grab bar, all these sorts of things.
Mhm.
And so we work through all of those pieces. And then we start to think about what questions the student can be asking the disability support offices at the institutions that they're interested in, right? So you've seen one disability support office, you've seen one disability support office. And so I'll often work with students to tell them how to reach out and set up an appointment. And then we'll create these questions so that they can vet the disability
Mm.
support offices, because those are the people that they're going to have to work with. So if I call them and ask questions, it's not going to be great because the student's the one who really has to start that self-advocacy. So we work on figuring that out. And then it's like figuring out all the other stuff, right? So a lot of the students that I work with have other medical needs. They might have like, IV treatments that they need to get, or they might have, medical supplies like cathing supplies that they need to figure out how they're getting, or, just other medication management pieces. And so we
Mhm.
also think about like, what's that going to look like when you're going to college? How are we going to make sure that you have what you need? And thinking about all the financial aspects, like, are they getting services from their state's vocational rehabilitation program?
Mhm.
Is the student eligible for supplemental security income, SSI? And I can point them to other resources too. So there's
Yeah.
like a lot of moving parts, but it's a different look than a college counselor or a college consultant might be doing with a student, who's usually working with the student on like finding the right academic fit and like helping them with their essays, which is very important work. This is like the
That leaves all
next,
of the other
yeah, the next
things. Yeah.
layer of
Yeah.
like of stuff that has to be sort of figured out. And you don't know what you don't know. So students might not know
Good
this
point.
information, and like parents too. Like, they're
Or
just trying to get through the day.
even professors or teachers, if
Yes,
they're, I mean, they
absolutely.
don't really know necessarily what the needs are either. So wow, yeah, like there's so much there. And I guess the weight of it feels like it would like impact, the families and the students sort of negatively. So like how do you kind of spin it, or how do you explain it in a way that's not just overwhelming pressure, but like this is
Yeah.
something you can do?
hmm I often joke with people like, how do you eat an elephant? And the answer is one bite at a time, right? Like, it feels huge. And the I think like the reason that people do opt to work with me is because it creates accountability, and it also like helps them break things down into manageable steps, right? We can
Hmm.
only do so much as humans, and especially in this world where there's so many moving parts, so many things going on every day. We have a lot of information input. I try to do things in like three, I never give more than like three sort of follow-up things to think about
Nice.
or things like that, because
Yeah.
like after three things, I zone out. Like I can't, if there's a list of to-dos that is like miles long, like
It's infinite sometimes, it feels like.
yeah, but
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
the things, I think the thing that I try to do is be a partner to the students and the families so that, we can work on these things incrementally. And that's why
Hmm.
it's really important to start as early as possible, right? Because like if you're trying to do all this stuff, like when
Last
you,
minute when you're getting
yes,
ready to move, and right,
it
right.
is a lot harder than if you start, junior year of high school and you're like thinking about it more incrementally.
Hmm.
Um, it can absolutely be done at the last minute. Like
True.
it can be done, but it's not going to be graceful, and it may not be easy. And it,
And then you may not have all the information that you could to make a better decision.
yes,
Yeah.
I mean, like this is the thing. Like I always meet people where they're at, right? And I'm not shaming people for not being
True.
totally
Right.
on time with their timelines. Like there are a lot of scenarios and a lot of different circumstances. So I'm mindful of that. But at the same time, if people can start early, they should start early,
Absolutely.
thinking about all these needs. So yeah.
Hmm. Hmm. And I wanted to ask you a little bit about reasonable accommodations, like where that's at and what are the limitations of that right now.
Yeah, I mean, so the ADA was passed in what, 1990,
Hmm.
and we just passed, a 35 years of the ADA back in July. Um, and so the ADA applies to both the college setting and the employment setting as well. I think a lot of times people forget about the employment setting when we're talking about this post-secondary education piece. But the what is reasonable is determined based on sort of what the student's condition is, how the condition impacts them, so what those functional limitations are that the student experiences, and then the program, right? So like what is the student studying? What are the technical standards of that program? So like, is the student becoming a doctor? There are specific technical standards if you
Right.
want to be an MD, or if
Mhm.
you're going into another medical program like nursing or occupational therapy or physical therapy. There might be technical standards for other vocational programs too, like HVAC maintenance or electricians. So those are some things that, depending on your condition, you might want to investigate, like what are the technical standards of that, and looking at like what the program requirements are. So those are like, that's like the general stuff that any student with or without a disability would probably want to be aware of before they're going
Mhm.
into a program. But usually what happens is the student will, once they've committed to a college, they'll make an appointment to connect with the disability support office, where they'll be asked to provide documentation of a disability. Every college has their own documentation guidelines. So
Mhm.
it's really important that students are looking at what is on that disability support office website to make sure that they have documentation that'll work for that school. And then you'll talk to the disability support office about what your needs are, and they may recommend some accommodations, or they might not. So they might be relying on the student to say, this is what I think I'm going to need, and that's usually, I give my students, we work on a list of accommodations for them to request. But what I do is we work through, like, what does the program look like? What sorts of classes are you going to be taking? Is it more like internship based? Are there going to be like more experiential programming? Is your school a small liberal arts school or a giant state school? So there might be some variations in instruction in different programs, or like expectations in different programs. And so we have to think about what's going to be reasonable in those circumstances. And so the whole point of reasonable accommodations is to, level the playing field, right? So that students with disabilities aren't given an advantage, but rather they are given a level playing field so they can access the same things that their peers are accessing, and engage in the way that works best for them with considering their needs.
That's something too I've thought about a lot, is just the diversity of the college campuses, what the enrollment looks like, what the programs like, and the buildings are outdated. There's just so many variables that it has to be almost case by case, it seems like, with all the different specific things going on.
Yeah, I mean, like, physical accessibility is a huge issue on lots
Mhm.
of college campuses, because many college campuses were built, over 100 years ago. Um, so that can be a really big challenge. And when I'm talking with students who are like going on tours and like starting to like investigate what could be an option for them, one of the things that we talk about is like looking at, where are the accessible entrances when you're on campus? Are you looking around? How would I get into that building? Are they all around the back by the dumpsters?
Of course,
You
the
know, like,
favorite place to put them.
and like, do you want to access everything that way? Is that like something that you're comfortable with, or that you think you would be comfortable with? Like, do you want to look at schools that have newer construction? Part of the accommodations process might mean that the disability office is asking to move classes to more accessible buildings for that
Right.
student. So that could be a reasonable accommodation. But what that often means is that there might be buildings on campus that are inaccessible, that will not work for you to get into. And I think part of the questions that students need to ask themselves is like, am I okay with that? You know, do
Well,
I
and that's
want the education at this school?
exactly. That's what I was going to say. Like, it's a totally valid reason not to go to a certain university because of that lack of accessibility. Like, it's not something you have to force yourself to go through if it's just clearly not going to be a good fit.
This comes up a lot in conversations I have with students around
Uh-huh.
housing, because housing, like dorm life, is one of those spaces where the university just has to have like accessible spaces in their dorms. So it doesn't necessarily mean that every single dorm is going to be accessible. It just means that there will be an accessible space for the student who needs the accessible space, right? So, um, you know, sometimes students don't know that or aren't thinking about that, and they're like, oh, awesome, I have this accessible dorm room. But then they realize they can't go and visit their friends in their dorm rooms, which, might be fine. If that's fine for you and you just want to have parties in your room all the time, that's awesome.
Right.
But if you wanted that experience of like just being able to like go and visit a friend without having to worry about the accessibility, that may or may not be the case.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
like, that's something that I talk with a lot of students about as they're starting to like dig into what the campus actually looks like.
And that actually makes me think of the whole idea of like universal design, making it where even if the person in the room or in the classroom, wherever, is not disabled, it's accessible to everybody. Is that something are some colleges having kind of that
Yeah.
type of setup?
I would say that, more like in terms of construction, this
Mhm.
is, I think a lot of colleges are still stuck in the technical ADA compliance
Right. They are.
zone. Some are sort of going beyond ADA and looking at universal design in physical construction, right?
Mhm.
There is a push in higher education towards universal design in education when we're talking about creating a classroom environment that meets the needs of all different types of learners. So
Mhm.
that is a thing I think has gained more traction around like providing every student with notes, like making sure that everyone has access to the PowerPoint slides or can choose the type of
Exactly.
assignment or assessment that is going to work best for them to assess their knowledge and skills. But the physical accessibility piece, I think we're still sort of constrained on in most places.
Yeah.
Um, but where you will see more physically accessible campuses are typically campuses that have like adaptive sports programs.
Right.
Um,
So they're already in that space. So I mean, it
yeah.
makes sense to go there. Yeah.
They're also
Yeah.
usually large state schools, which is sort of counter to what most people would think about as like a physically accessible environment.
Mhm.
So, like that might not work for everybody to have like a giant campus. And yes, it might be more physically accessible, but it might be more taxing to like
Right.
navigate. So there's no perfect place. That's what
Right.
I will
That's a
say.
good thing to remember, and I think too that obviously it depends on the university, but like in my experience, I actually started going to a building that was brand new. It was like an entrepreneurial like discovery center and things like that. And right away I realized there were no push button doors anywhere, not even into the main open like check-in part of the building. And it was just mind blowing to me that with the standards and everything out there, how that could be overlooked or left out, or it's just so hit or miss on what's out there.
It makes you say to yourself, how did this pass inspection?
That's or was there an inspection, right? Yeah,
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 I mean,
yeah.
and this is where I think students with disabilities on college campuses can be really impactful because there are always ways in communities too, but it's, on college campuses is usually where students are starting to get more active in the disability community is like, can you get on the committees that are talking about new building designs? Can you just interject this like conversation around
Yeah.
disability and accessibility on your campus? Because students have actually a lot of power, and I don't think they realize it.
I don't either. I don't either. And I was lucky enough to have advisors when I was first starting graduate school and doing research. I needed an office, and sometimes I needed to get into the laboratory setting where there were experiments going on, and then obviously the restroom access. And like me and like a small team of advisors and people that were in the engineering department, like spent over a year trying to get push buttons installed just in the graduate area that I was in. And
Hmm.
like you're right, there is a lot of power in that because eventually all of those doors were fitted with power opening and they had locks, to make sure things were still secure. And
Yeah.
like to this day, I've never seen anything that inclusive in really any sort of business or school setting, and it's like, is it money? Is it time? Is it just not the emphasis of the university to try to provide those kind of things? I mean, it's really difficult to get change
Yeah.
implemented.
I think it's all of the above, right? Is it
Yeah,
money? Is it
yeah,
time? Is it all?
all of the factors.
I mean, it's all of those things. But I also think that like there's the law is on our side, right? So like that is positive.
Mhm.
And even in the face of sort of cuts around the Department of Education and things like that, like I think that universities generally want to support community members, and students are community members in that space. And um, you know, finding your resources, finding peers on campus who also have disabilities. A lot of campuses now have like student groups that are
Mhm.
advocacy groups around disability, or they might also be social groups. There are like 20 campuses that have disability cultural centers in
Oh,
addition
okay.
to like the disability support office. The
Mhm.
disability cultural center is like an identity affinity space where they might have like cool speakers coming in and social activities and support systems in place. So there are a lot more resources now. They're still disparate and students aren't always
True.
connected to them, but they're there. And I think that students can find their allies, right? It's just like that for any student who's experiencing any sort of challenge,
Yeah.
right? Like find your people, they're there.
Right, right. And sometimes it's a surge, but once you find it, the accommodations are going to be so much better, and they're going to help amplify the student's voice and getting changes, to their particular area. So I mean, that's huge to be able to find that, even though it's not always easy.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah. So I guess when parents and kids are looking at a university, like what's kind of the process for getting in touch with you and starting work there, and then transitioning to actually physically going to the college.
Yeah. So I have a website. It's called accessiblecollege.com. So it's easy to, to remember. And we can put it in the show notes too.
Hmm.
And I'm on Instagram and Facebook. And so people can get a free 30-minute consultation with me. So we could talk about, just what working with me would look like.
Yeah.
I also have online courses too. So I have an online course called Preparing Students with Physical Disabilities and Health Conditions for College. And I designed it for parents, for educators, for counselors, healthcare providers, to start to wrap their brains around all of the changes that happen from high school to college. So, looking
Hmm.
at the legal pieces, connecting with disability support offices, identifying accommodations, independent living, continuity of care, hiring personal care attendants. So, it's like
Yeah.
a comprehensive course. So, if people want to take a DIY approach, they can absolutely take that
Hmm.
online
Hmm.
course. And I have another online course that's coming up, a live one that's coming up at the end of October that'll also be on demand later. My friend Christy Siktor, who has a physical disability and
Hmm.
is an occupational therapist, is going to be talking about dorm life and daily routines, preparing students with physical disabilities for independent living on a college
Hmm.
campus. So that might be applicable. And both of my courses have American Occupational Therapy Association CEU credits, and the signature course has CEU credits for social workers too. And then I have like a free course too that you would probably love, Ty, and some of your listeners would love
Yeah.
too. On it just shares the experiences of students who brought personal care attendants to college. So it was a three-part series I did this past summer with three different students and their parents on how they managed, hired, funded personal care attendants and what their experience was like bringing those PCAs to college or
Mm.
having PCAs in college. And they're all very different scenarios and they all handle it a little bit different. So I just thought it was really cool to show students who had actually navigated this process and
Hmm.
were navigating this process currently so that other students could see like what it could look like for them. And I think it was like it's a story that really isn't told very often.
No, no, it's not.
So I was like, let's tell it, and we did. And so that's free, and it's under. If you go to accessiblecollege.com,
Mhm.
there's a course section up top, and so people can just click on that and they can get access to all of those courses. But people can also do free consultations with me, and I
Yeah.
have loads of free resources on my website and social media. So just connect with me, everyone.
Right, right. And what I like so much about that too is it's not just here's one resource to help. It's like tailored to almost disability or how comfortable they are, like with any of those areas. Like it seems really like customizable to the student.
Yeah, I mean, there is no one size fits all.
Yeah. That's one of
So
my favorite quotes, by the way.
I mean, it's true. It is absolutely true, right?
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
what works for one student may not work for another student. And so, some things are generalizable, but a lot of things aren't. And
Hmm.
so, the work that I do is really tailored, customized to the student who I'm working with and, and and also just where they're at,
Yeah,
because a
yeah.
lot of students aren't super comfortable talking about their needs yet. And so we work on that.
True.
You chip away, you peel back the layers of the onion.
Right. Make incremental steps towards
Yep.
towards getting there. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
You
yeah.
eat the elephant.
Right, right. So I'm curious, like if there is there like a particular example or like huge challenge that you saw the student overcome in their program that sort of stands out in your mind?
Oh, I mean, where do we start? I
There's
mean,
so
there's
many.
there's so many
Uh,
examples. I actually have like on my website, there's a new post that I did recently about the Reeve Foundation, which features three students who worked with me through the Christopher and Dana Reeve Foundation
uh,
and looks at their stories. But one of the students, this is hard because I don't want to name
true, true.
institutions right now, but there was one student who had an issue with her dormitory where she was trapped in her dorm room for the weekend because the elevators all went out. And that
Wow.
student did a really great job of advocating. She coordinated with other students. I've had a couple students who I've worked with around like lab accessibility
Hmm.
too, where they needed lab assistance or they needed a physically accessible lab or they needed to be able to bring their service animal into the lab and the university had not navigated that before. So I'm able to provide students with resources on that. I've also had students who have come to me and said, "Oh, my university told me that I can't have a personal care attendant with me overnight." And
Wow. Okay.
yeah. And I say, that's a really interesting thing that they told you. They are misinformed. And
To put
then,
it nicely.
I'm like, okay, we'll catch more flies with honey than vinegar. We start with
Fair.
honey,
That's
then we
fair.
then we can go to vinegar. 9 times out of 10, the folks in the disability support office just have not had this experience before, or the student might be speaking to someone in housing who really has no idea. Um, and no diss to my former, student affairs colleagues, but like we don't all know all the things, but students can
No.
absolutely bring personal care attendants, especially if you can't self-transfer during the night, especially when you're thinking about emergency
I mean,
situations.
sometimes night is the like, most times you need help more.
Or if you use a respirator, or if
Uh,
you need
yeah.
a BiPAP, or if you need to be repositioned, whatever those
Yeah.
situations might be. And so I'll guide students in how to have these conversations with their disability offices and resources to share, because
Hmm.
I'm also a member of the Association of Higher Education and Disability, which is all of the disability support office folks.
Hmm. Hmm.
And I've done a lot of trainings for that group as well. And there's always a need for more training.
Yeah.
um,
Always
for
right.
every group, but like, so those are some scenarios of just like thinking through some of these pieces. And
Hmm.
even if a student has an invisible condition, like with episodic flare-ups like POTS or Ehlers-Danlos or something like that, they're likely going to need accommodations in college. And so thinking about, if you need extensions on assignments because you have a flare-up condition, you're going to want to get that in place. And you're also going to want to be prepared to talk with each of your individual professors at the beginning of the semester to have a conversation about what that's going to look like. So I guide students on like how to have that chit chat, what to say, what not to say,
Right. It's not always easy for
No, I
sure.
mean,
Yeah.
I always joke though that professors are just humans, right? They're just people. They have families sometimes. They have
Which
their
is
own
forgotten
challenges.
probably a little too often, but
They can be a little intimidating. I
yeah.
totally get it.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, they're just people.
Right. And I think too, so much of like providing accommodations is bringing sort of that openness to each student, where it is like a feedback situation where they're the expert on kind of what their needs are and what their life has been like, but then also, you're giving them like tools and guidance to figure it out.
Yeah,
So
it's
it's
like the work that I do is akin to coaching, right? So
yeah,
it's
it
like
is. It is.
it's providing that guidance, so that students feel like they have the tools in their toolbox so that they can pull them out and use them when they need to.
Yeah. Yeah. That's really well said. So I guess kind of going back to a little more of your story to
Hmm.
move towards wrapping. I don't know, I'm just curious, like where you like how you have dealt with maybe the heaviness of all of these students and families coming in with their situations, and they're all, I mean, some of them are probably really hard to see or to deal with. Like I'm just curious how you process that and how you look at it when it's a little too heavy feeling.
Yeah. It's I mean, it's a tricky situation.
Yeah.
I think in total, there is often more joy than there is sadness in my
Hmm.
job because like I have seen the bad times, but I've also seen like people come through those things or
Hmm.
work through these things and flourish, right? So many of the students that I work with like stay in touch with me through the lifespan after they graduate college, and
Hmm.
I see them like going on to do great things, right? Or making it, or even just like making it through some of the bad things, right?
Right. Right.
So even in those situations where you're like, whoa, this is really tricky and complicated, and maybe the student is even being discriminated against, which does sometimes happen.
Hmm.
Um, the way that I sort of frame that too is knowing that we will likely get to the joy at some point.
Right. Right. And
So
in the end, I mean, it is focused on the empowerment of students to pursue a career that they want, right? I mean, so like the
yeah.
undertones are positive on what the goal ultimately is, which I think would help quite a lot. But also I just think about how even just on social media, seeing the stories that we
Hmm.
see, it's just like, well, the more depth, the more you dig into the details of what's going on, it can be overbearing to just absorb that kind of information.
Yeah, I know, like for me personally, like I choose to spend a lot of time outside.
Yep.
So like for me, it might be like exercising in a way that I am able to, or just
Hmm.
like being, away from the computer, away from the social media stuff when I need to be. Sometimes that's hard because you get sucked down the Instagram
Yeah.
or TikTok hole. But there are some like little measurement, like little management steps that I can take that help me personally.
Mhm.
And then for my students, like I know that like we're gonna navigate through the weeds and we're gonna find the sunshine. And it's sometimes a journey, but
Yeah.
sticking with it is key.
And finding resources like,
Yeah.
like what you're offering. I mean, that's such a big step to have someone in their corner, whose intentions are just all for helping them get what they need to, keep living the dream, I guess, as they say. Um,
Absolutely.
yeah. Well, it's definitely a needed program, and I could have used so many, tools that you're offering, I think, when I was going through it. And so I'm sure there's listeners that are going to be hearing it thinking, hey, this is an option. Maybe I can go to college independently. And, I just, if one person gets something out of that, it's worth it, I think.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. And I want as many people to be able to access these resources as possible.
Right, right. So I guess for people who are reaching out, do you recommend going to the website first or social media or just kind of wherever
Either
they're
one
at?
is
Yeah.
fine. Yeah, the website is great. It's accessiblecollege.com, and you can
Hmm.
find me Instagram or Facebook at Accessible College. I also have a Facebook group called College Success, Physical
Oh, okay.
Disabilities, Chronic Health, and Mental Health. So it's a great space where people share information and questions as well. So there's that community too that
Yeah.
people can take advantage of.
Awesome. That sounds really good. Well, I sure appreciate the time, and I could see us going into a bunch of different like niche areas of what's going on. But yeah, maybe that's a future conversation. But
Happy to talk to you again, Ty.
yeah, sounds great. Well, I'll make sure to include information on how people can access what resources you have, and yeah, hopefully it keeps going, keeps helping more and more people realize they can do college with disability.
Absolutely.